Okay, good morning, everyone here in Finland, in Europe. Good afternoon, everyone in Central Asia. I think there's still a few people in the waiting room, but I think it's time to make a start. Sorry for being a couple minutes late. We had some technical issues, as always, with the webinars. But uh, it's my absolute pleasure to invite you all to this webinar on the perception of Russia and China in Central Asia. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kristiina Silvan. I am the postdoctoral fellow at Finnish Institute of International Affairs, Russia, EU's Eastern Neighborhood and Eurasia Research Program. And at FIA, I do research on the domestic and foreign policy of Russia, Belarus, and the 5 post-Soviet states of Central Asia. And I personally am particularly interested in Russia's changing role in Central Asia, which is one of the reasons why we're hosting this webinar today. So as an introduction to the webinar, I just wanted to say that I see that for Central Asian governments, China and Russia are really the two most important partners in trade, in diplomacy, in security, but they are also the two most controversial ones. And the relations with China and Russia are not really easy for any of the states in the region. And it seems to me that although scholars, experts, and journalists follow the dynamic relationship of Central Asian states with their two large neighbors, the role of public opinion shaping these relations is usually left outside the discussion. There can be several reasons for this. For me, they all can be explained by the authoritarian context of Central Asia. There's the problem of data availability from the region. There's the issue of data quality, and I presume our speakers will be talking more about this. But second, maybe there's also this idea that public opinion has very little of an impact on government policy, so why should we even talk about it? Well, as you might probably guess by now, I do think that we should talk about the perceptions of China and Russia, especially now. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine that was launched nearly 3 years ago has contributed to a growing polarization within Central Asian societies. And after the Crocus City Concert Hall terrorist attack in Moscow this spring, Russia has experienced a completely unprecedented upsurge of anti-immigration sentiment that is still ongoing, and it's Russia's sizable Central Asian migrant population that has become the primary target for any racism on the grassroots level, but also in policy. So the first question that I have posed to this webinar is whether the public image of Russia is becoming less positive in Central Asia as a result of these developments. As for China, we all hear about its growing presence in Central Asia, but this does mean that an increasing number of Central Asians have an idea of China and the Chinese based not just on media reporting, but also on personal experience. So I wonder whether this means that people's perception of China is becoming maybe less negative or rather reinforcing the xenophobia on the ground that scholars have written about a lot. So all in all, I think we have a lot to discuss. And it is my absolute pleasure to moderate today's discussion. We've got two excellent speakers joining us from Central Asia. From Kazakhstan, we've got Dr. Janibek Arinov, who is Associate Professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy at Nazarbayev University in Astana, Kazakhstan. Dr. Arinov conducts research on Central Asian geopolitics, Kazakhstan's foreign policy, and image and perception studies. And he is currently working on projects related to regional organizations in Central Asia and Eurasia. And our second speaker, Ms. Kasiet Ismanova, is from Kyrgyzstan. She is the director of the Central Asia Barometer. Central Asia Barometer, or CAB, as I call it in Finnish. I don't know if it's how everyone calls it, but it's an independent non-profit institution for studying social, economic, and political aspects of public opinion in Central Asia, and a hugely valuable resource for researchers like myself. Regrettably, however, the institution has had to suspend its full operations this month due to the growing insecurity and challenges related to the conducting of ethical survey research in the region. So on that note, I would like to launch this seminar and yield the floor to Dr. Arinov.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me, Christina? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's a pleasure being here. And thank you for PR for organizing this this event. So I will be mostly talking about Russia, probably. Not only the perceptions of Russia, but I also try to share a bigger picture on what is happening in the relationship between Russia and Central Asia. And then when we talk about Central Asia, of course, we are talking about 5 different countries in the region. So we have to keep in mind that despite we call the region as one region, Central Asia, all 5 countries have their different relations with Russia, different relations with China. So in my case, I will be mostly talking about Kazakhstan, the case of Kazakhstan. Christina, you absolutely rightly mentioned that the perceptions of Russia has been significantly changing in Central Asia. Especially in Kazakhstan, we see those tendencies. We see those tendencies in Uzbekistan, in other countries, maybe to a slightly smaller degree. But definitely the war that Russia launched against Ukraine in 2022 has significantly undermined the perceptions of Russia, not only in the public eyes, but also in the governments. I mean, when you talk to different stakeholders, the different public officials, civil servants who deal with Russia or Russia-related issues, most of them share some kind of skepticism towards Russia. They share lots of common, I mean, across all Central Asian countries, most of them share the increased pressure from Russia. So in that sense, I think there is this huge shift, not only in public perceptions again, but also in the mindset of maybe the bureaucracy. I'm not 100% sure about the high-level decision makers in Central Asia, but at least at the level of bureaucracy, you these days hear lots of complaints about Russia, which was very unusual in previous years. So I think that mindset also the shift in the mindset, I think, probably can also explain some of the things that are happening in foreign policies of these countries towards Russia. So when we start talking about Kazakhstan, probably I will start not from the war in Ukraine in February, but a bit earlier, because in January 2022, as some of you may know, Kazakhstan experienced the biggest political turmoil, the biggest political protest in the country. That was January 2022. The early January, and then the government, the president of Kazakhstan, formally appealed to the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, the security organization led by Russia, but also joined by Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and Tajikistan. And then the Kazakhstan officially appealed to CSTO to intervene into this domestic political protest, arguing that those were terrorists attacking the country from abroad. And then within a matter of days, CSTO sent its peacekeeping mission to Kazakhstan, and then the protests were over. So this was a starting point for Kazakhstan, I think, to reevaluate the perceptions of Russia. I mean, at least at the society level. Why? Because by the majority of the population in Kazakhstan perceived this intervention by CSTO as intervention by Russia into domestic affairs of Kazakhstan. And then it was interpreted as a big threat to sovereignty. And to give the logic context, the different Russian actors, including the members of the Russian parliament, Duma, different political figures, journalists, different media outlets, they have always been articulating certain narratives against the territorial sovereignty of Kazakhstan back years ago. I mean, it still continues today. So in that kind of context, when lots of Russian actors claim that the northern part of Kazakhstan belongs to Russia, and then suddenly CSTO is perceived to intervene into domestic affairs, it was perceived as a big threat to sovereignty. And I think this was the starting point to reevaluate what Russia means for Kazakhstan, what Russia can do for Kazakhstan, because all previous polls from 2010s, late 2010s, tended to show that Russia was one of the most favorably perceived actors in Kazakhstan. But everything changed after this January and later the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because that was also interpreted not as an attack, not only as an attack on Ukraine, but potentially also an attack on Kazakhstan, because again, these perceptions, the threat perceptions coming from Russia were quite visible during the January, February of 2022, even before the start of the war. And now the war happened, and the people openly, the different movements, different segments of society, they started talking about Russia as a potential threat to the sovereignty of Kazakhstan. So this is a big kind of shift that we have seen in the public mood. And also, I think maybe Cassette will tell us more about this, but Central Asia Barometer did several polls in 2022, 2023 regarding this war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine. And the results of the surveys came as a surprise personally to me. Why? Because this poll showed, and then we also had several internal domestic polls in Kazakhstan. Their results were showing more or less the same picture. Now we had about 1/3 of the population in Kazakhstan who were blaming Russia, who were perceiving Russia as a threat, as an aggressor, and so on and so forth. Almost 30%, slightly under 30%, but still it's huge. It was huge in the context of Kazakhstan, because again, previously all the existing shows used to show that 80%, 85% of the population in the country were favorably perceiving Russia. Right now, we see a different picture, and the same polls showed that now more people supported Ukraine than Russia. We saw some grassroots level mobilization in the society to help Ukraine, to send medical goods, to send different kind of other non-military goods to Ukraine, to help Ukraine. And then this all show, I think, this mood in the society. When it comes to the government, at least in the case of Kazakhstan, I think the expectation, I remember early January, February 2022, when many Western, maybe not only Western, but also the local, but many experts would predicted that Kazakhstan now would become another kind of Belarus, because Russia now saved the Tokayev regime, and now Tokayev is indebted to Putin, and then this will be kind of that would be the end of Kazakhstan's multi-factor foreign policy. So those expectations were there in January, in February, but I think the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, has reshuffled everything. And right after the war, during the first months of the war, we saw quite the bold statements from different political figures in Kazakhstan, who were again quite bold in their statements against Russia. I would say that against Russia, because, for instance, one case was that was June 2020 or May 2022, when President Tokayev, sitting next to Putin, said that Kazakhstan would never recognize quasi-state entities like Donetsk and Lugansk. That was a kind of a big blow. And then Russia cut several times the pipeline that Kazakhstan uses to export its oil to Europe. So those tensions were there, and the government has become a bit bolder, in my opinion, in saying no, at least in staying neutral towards Russia. Why even staying neutral was bold for me, because again, we know how much Kazakhstan depends on Russia economically, politically, and informationally, culturally, if you wish. And then we've heard many cases when Russians were quite threatening the countries to win the support from these countries. Let's say in UN General Assembly votings and in other cases. So in those kind of cases, I think saying no to Russia, I think, was quite a bold movement. And even in some cases when the countries of Central Asia stayed neutral or I think those were also quite bold moves from the Central Asian countries. Again, provided that given that Central Asian countries heavily depend on Russia on many kind of things. So this was 2022. Again, the 2023 maybe, but today I think we are observing slight changes in the both in the public mood and also from the government in the government approach towards Russia. So in the public mood, I think pro-Ukrainian attitudes have slightly calmed down. People probably feel a bit tired of this war, at least, I mean, including in Kazakhstan, right? They don't pay that much attention to the war anymore. And also this openly anti-Russian sentiments, I think they are not that much common, at least in the public sphere, right? You don't hear that many comparatively kind of openly anti-Russian sentiments in at least Kazakh society anymore. There was one recently one case. Maybe I'll talk about this in a moment. And this, the government, the same goes for the government. The government of Kazakhstan, which was trying to oppose any support to Russia, which has been trying to balance Russia's pressure, but now we see a kind of different picture in the case of Kazakhstan, at least again. Now, some Kazakh ministers say that Kazakhstan will not blindly follow the sanctions if those sanctions are determine Kazakhstan's own national interest. Previously, in 2022, 2023, Kazakhstan was clear that it would follow the Western sanctions against Russia. But now, I think we see that change in the narrative, at least. Secondly, I think again, recently, President Tokayev of Kazakhstan repeated twice at least that Russia is undefeatable in terms of military. Yeah, let's sit and talk. Let's solve the issue diplomatically. I think it's also something new, at least in the official rhetoric of Kazakhstan. But at the same time, and then we have lots of projects that Kazakhstan is doing with Russia. So this energy projects in Kazakhstan, the pipeline, the gas pipeline through Kazakhstan to Russia is being discussed. Kazakhstan now is planning to build the first nuclear power plant in the country, and it's believed that probably the Russian Rosatom would win this tender. Again, we have to see it in 2025, but still the talks are over there. And more recently, President Putin came to Kazakhstan with the official visit, and then participated in the CSTO meeting, the summit. And then Putin was received very warm welcome from the government. There were all over the city in Astana, the capital city of Kazakhstan. The Russian flags were all over the streets. And then there was a huge banner right next to the airport welcoming Your Excellency Vladimir Putin, welcome to Kazakhstan, this kind of stuff. And then people were mad about it. People were unhappy, at least in social media. People were expressing quite a visible, I think, sentiments against this kind of treating of Vladimir Putin, arguing that we never had this kind of treatment to any other leader. But again, it's a bit misleading because in June 2024, this year earlier, Xi Jinping of China received the same kind of treatment. Some Central Asian leaders, including the president of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, received the same kind of treatment. And then back then, there was no this kind of public discontent. But when Vladimir Putin came to Kazakhstan, and then we see this kind of picture, I think it also shows to what extent the people's mindset, at least in certain segments of the population, have changed significantly. So what I'm trying to conclude with my last sentence, the war in Ukraine, previously the CSTO's intervention in Kazakhstan have significantly changed the mindsets of the people towards Russia. Back in 2022, 2023, Kazakh government received a bit more space for multi-vector foreign policy to balance out Russia's pressure. But probably that space is shrinking now, and probably at the official level, the government is going back to the normal pre-2022 kind of relations with Russia. But again, given this public sentiments anti-Russian, to what extent it will be possible, time will show, I think. Yeah, I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for this fantastic overview, Zhanibek. I've already got a ton of questions on my mind. I'm sure that people in the audience feel the same, but I would actually propose that we now give the floor to Kasiet Ismanova, and we'll have questions after her presentation. So Kasiet, if you're ready.
Thanks, Ilvan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I also hope that you can also see me. I'm having these problems with my laptop. First of all, I would like to thank for this opportunity. Maybe someone can show my slides. Oh, great. Thanks. I would like to thank for this opportunity to speak to this audience. Thanks for the invitation. I am Kasiet Ismanova, as mentioned. I'm a quantitative and qualitative researcher based in Bishkek. And Zhanibek provided a lot of very interesting contextual knowledge about these issues that we are going to discuss, but I'm mostly going to be Mikhail, can we open the first slide, please? So I will be mostly talking about the quantitative data that CAP has been gathering. And let me tell a little bit about the survey itself and the report that we just published. So Central Asia Barometer has been an active regional institution for public opinion monitoring from 2017 till 2023. We worked to monitor the public opinion. We conducted one of our flagship projects is the Central Asia Barometer survey. We have other projects as well, which are also available on our website, but our flagship project is Central Asia Barometer survey, which is a probability-based survey. We started it in 2017, and we've been covering all 5 Central Asian countries. Can I ask again if we can open the first slide, or is it only me seeing this slide? You just can go to the very first slide. Thank you. So we've been covering all 5 Central Asian countries with this probability-based surveys. We started with face-to-face, and then we switched to telephone, but we were able to cover even Turkmenistan. And the questions in the CAP survey, they're different. We have different sections. For example, during the pandemic, we had public health section. We have sections on economy, on migration, on media, on international relations. And all data is open access on our website. Anyone can download it and use it. And recently we have also introduced an online data analysis tool, which has been our long-time dream as a barometer. All other barometers in the world had this tool, and we just acquired it with the help of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. Thanks for them a lot. And now anyone without any SPSS or STATA skills can just go to the website and with a few clicks can access the public opinion data. For example, if you want to know what is the percentage of people who have access to internet on their phone, you can just do it in a few clicks, and you will get data for 5 Central Asian countries. So this data has been widely used by academics, but we also wanted this data to be used by the journalists and students, and we started to publish reports, survey reports. And this time we supported a group of sinologists who focus on the region to work with this data, to run some regressions, to look on whether there are some contextual explanations of the survey data differences between the countries or from one wave to another wave. So we had this group working on this for a couple of months, and they have produced this report, which is called Beyond the Silk Road, Navigating the Complexities of Central Asia's Public Opinion of China. And we had this presentation in Almaty at the end of October. So I'm going to share the insights from this report today. Maybe we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And the next slide. Thank you. So in this Central Asia Barometer survey, as I mentioned, there are many different questions, but this report focused on China because we understood, we wanted this report to be focused on China because we saw that there are very few China specialists in the region, and we wanted this report to be kind of inspiration for them, and so that they can see what can be done with this data, and they can work with this data as well during using other methods. So in our questionnaire on the China section, we have questions about what is the opinion of China. Would you say your opinion of China is favorable? And it's also a Likert scale question. We also ask about China's development and infrastructure projects in the region. We also ask about Chinese workers coming to work for these projects. And we also ask about the Chinese technology. And in this report, there are different sections. One section is on descriptive statistics, and there are some regression results. So anyone who would be interested, I hope after this presentation, you would go to the website and look at this report. Next slide, please. Again, next slide. Next. Let's start with the favorability, general favorability of China. So I think it has been a lot of, there have been many discussions on what is the opinion of China, but we have this data to work with, and we see here, for example, the trends in the public opinion on China. For example, when we look at the border countries, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, which are borders with China, we saw more favorability in 2017, 2018, favorability around 50% in 2019 and 2020, and the favorability going stronger since 2022. So actually, we see a lot of xenophilia in these two countries, not xenophobia. In other countries, in Uzbekistan, you can see it in the fourth chart. We see a very interesting variation over time. We see unfavorability since fall 2022. And in Turkmenistan, we see that favorability remains high despite this downward trend. But still it's pretty high in Turkmenistan. And I should mention here that when we ask about opinion on China, we also ask about other countries within the same section. We ask about Russia, US, we ask about Turkey, we ask about other Central Asian countries. So this is a part of this standard questionnaire. Next slide, please. Thank you. And here, as I mentioned, we ask about other countries, but in this presentation, I just want to make some comparisons between these powers, Russia and the USA. So we see no similar trends across perceptions of foreign countries. Russia generally maintains the highest favorability across the countries, but this has declined over time in all countries except Kyrgyzstan. And we see that China's favorability has been subject to greater fluctuation than Russia or the US since the start of the survey. Next slide, please. We also have this section on Chinese projects, Chinese presence in the region. And when we look at the border countries, we see more favorability in later waves. We see strong support in Kyrgyzstan for the projects. In Uzbekistan, we see strong support across the waves. So it's over 75%. In Turkmenistan, we see that it has always remained the same, the highest among the Central Asian countries. I should also mention here that we don't ask these questions in Tajikistan about China because it's a sensitive issue there. So Tajikistan is not included here. Next slide, please. Thank you. When it comes to the support of Chinese workers coming to work in the country, we see absolutely different picture. We see higher position in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan because these are the border countries, but we see some decrease in opposition in Kyrgyzstan in the last waves. In Uzbekistan, we see support for workers, and in Turkmenistan too. But in Turkmenistan, we have a very limited data. It hasn't been asked for many years. It has been asked just for several waves. Next slide, please. When it comes to support for China technology in general being accepted as something good in the region, we see support across the countries, and the support is increasing in border countries. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk, we also have a section regarding some negative associations with China, negative perceptions of China, and we wanted to learn more about it. And let's talk about this. Let's talk about concerns in the public opinion about China. Next slide, please. We ask about how confident, for example, we have two questions. We ask, how confident are you that China's investment will first improve infrastructures and the second, create jobs? And we also ask, how concerned, if at all, are you about quality of Chinese goods, increased national debt, and Chinese people buying land? These three questions are based on they were based and they were introduced to the survey because of the contextual situation in the countries. For example, there were some protests in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, in the border countries about Chinese people buying land. Also, there are many discussions and concerns about the debt to China, and also quality of Chinese goods. It has been a worldwide studied topic, right, when it comes to China. Next slide, please. And here we see that when we ask about Chinese projects, the confidence of the people, if these projects will improve infrastructure, we see this picture. The confidence is growing from wave to wave in the border countries. In other countries, the confidence also remained high, but it is decreasing in Uzbekistan. Next slide. About the job opportunities, we see again lower confidence than on infrastructure. So people are more confident about Chinese projects improving the infrastructure, but less confident about job opportunities. And we also see this here, the connection with the lack of support for Chinese workers coming to work, because mostly in the region, in Chinese infrastructure projects, there are also Chinese workers involved. Next slide, please. And when it comes to this low quality of goods and the national debt, we didn't ask this consistently. It wasn't asked in Turkmenistan due to sensitive nature of the question. But we see that the border countries, the population of the border countries has been consistently concerned about this, but they were mostly concerned about the debt rather than the goods. And yeah, in Uzbekistan, they were mostly concerned about the goods, but then there is a growing concern on debt. But even though in Uzbekistan, China is not that prevalent creditor, but yeah, also in the report, you will be able to see more contextual information about why would this be happening in Uzbekistan. Next slide, please. And this is also interesting about the land grabs. We call this land grabs about, this is a question. The question was actually formulated neutrally, but we ask about if they are concerned, if at all, of Chinese buyers that want to purchase land in the region. And in border countries, in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, consistently huge majorities are concerned. And this is single most relevant variable. And in Uzbekistan, we see growing concern after 2022. And it might be linked to the law that was introduced in Uzbekistan regarding the liberalization of land ownership for foreigners. Maybe closer to that date as well. So in the report, you will be also able to read the discussion about it. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we also conducted some regression analysis. I think I will cover it in like 2 minutes. Next slide, please. I will not cover the part where we have this, the explanation of the 6 set of models that we used, but we'll go directly to the results of the regression analysis. Next slide, please. The next, Ken. Yes, so here these are the results of the analysis, and we see that the use is more supportive of China. Gender has different effects, and we also saw that majority ethnicity, for example, Kazakhs in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyz in Kyrgyzstan, they are more negative on China. Yes, next slide, please. We also had some regional variations, and it was interesting for us to see some regional differences. In Kazakhstan, north and east are more positive, and in Turkmenistan, Mary and Lebap are more positive. In Uzbekistan, the regions, rural areas are much more negative than the urban areas, and in Kyrgyzstan, border regions are more negative of China. Next slide, please. I think I will stop here and we'll cover other questions. Maybe I will use the presentation to demonstrate when answering the questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Kasia. That was absolutely insightful, and indeed, the title of this report is that the picture of China is complex in Central Asia, and your presentation perfectly underlined that. Now, as you can see from our chat, there are already questions pouring in, so I suggest that we jump right onto them. And I would also suggest that maybe both of you can address these questions, although a lot of them are addressed to one of you. So let's start from the question on the chat from Ilham Halimzoda. It's a question to Jani Beck, and it goes like this. Do you think decreasing support for Ukraine can be related to 1, continuous Western trade with Russia, and 2, the West's different approach towards Russia and Israel?
Should I answer now, or do we collect a few questions?
Maybe we can actually collect, because I presume there'll be more questions. So let me then give the next question to Kasiet. It's about China, and the question is something that you mentioned kind of in the passing, that you couldn't ask about Chinese projects in Tajikistan because it's a sensitive issue. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit on the sensitivities of that?
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
There are many different. China question is not the only sensitive question in Tajikistan. Politics in general are sensitive, and we don't ask about like the countries, religion, the minorities. These kind of questions are sensitive in Tajikistan. Also, it's not only Tajikistan, but also in some ways it's Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, depending on the context. But in Tajikistan, yes. So CAP works through providers, and they would refuse to run surveys using these questions. So basically, this is how we understand that these are sensitive questions, and we don't include them. Yeah. So it's not only Tajikistan, but also Turkmenistan. In other countries, and there are different sensitive questions too, not only China.
Yeah, Ordi, as a follow-up, I want maybe Janibek, you'll answer and then we'll continue.
Yeah, okay. Answering to the given question, I think the question means the public support, right, for Ukraine, whether it's decreasing in the context of this trade with Russia, the Western trade, and also the developments in the Middle East. So definitely, I'm not sure again because we don't have any evidence-based studies examining this relationship, but from my anecdotal data, talking to average citizens in the country, to my friends, relatives, we know that even in public servants, we know that some of them are a bit skeptical of this trade between Western countries and Russia, and also some of the Western Western-produced goods are reshipped through Kazakhstan to Russia. And then the question is always to the countries of the Central Asia from Western countries asking, you are circumventing the sanctions. And then the question arises, okay, who is selling those products to this Kazakhstan registered or Kyrgyzstan registered companies? Those are the Dutch companies, those are companies registered in some of the European countries. So in that sense, some of the countries that are registered in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and to a lesser degree in Uzbekistan, they are interacting with Europe-based or EU-based companies to reship some of those, I don't know, computers, chips, and so on and so forth. So I heard a few times from some of the civil servants in Central Asian countries saying that, well, we have to ask those questions from Europeans. If they want us to stop trading with Russia, they first should stop or better control what they sell. So the question is definitely there, but I'm not sure whether that has a direct impact on this the support on Ukraine. The second is Israel. That's even more visible, I guess. That's even more visible. But I'm not sure whether this is necessarily undermining the support towards Ukraine, but definitely the West's approach to the Middle East, undermining the perceptions of the collective West in general. First of all, of the US, of course, but also some of the European countries as well. Definitely, that's one of the hottest topics that we've seen in the past few months, so maybe over a year now. Yeah.
Maybe I can add a little bit here about the military bases, military cooperation. In the CAP survey, we also had question about what the respondent thinks, what is his general opinion. I'm not sure about this, like the exact formulation, but you can find it on our website in the questionnaires too. But we ask about the military bases of different countries. We ask about Chinese military bases, Russian, and the US. And we also have worked on a report, which is called Echoes of War, Public Perception of the Russian-Ukrainian War in Central Asia. I also included the link here. And in this report, you will be able to see the data about these military bases. So might be helpful for you.
Maybe to complement Kassiet's question, I think you are responding to the question from Otto, I guess, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We did, in 2023, we collected focus group data about CSTO, more specifically about CSTO in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. So I don't want to talk about Armenia because that's a totally different story, but at least in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, we see quite a huge skepticism towards CSTO or any kind of military cooperation within CSTO, I mean, with Russia in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So first thing is the data that we collected shows that people don't know much about this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, CSTO, Eurasian Economic Union, and so on and so forth. They don't know much about what kind of exercises they do. But on a very general note, people in Kazakhstan were very much skeptical about any cooperation with the CSTO or Russia, any kind of military cooperation with Russia. I think that's one, again, the CSTO's intervention in January 2022, and the second, the war in Ukraine, I guess, those are the two main factors. In Kyrgyzstan, the picture is a bit kind of different. I mean, even in Kyrgyzstan, the attitudes towards CSTO or any kind of military cooperation with Russia were negative, but not because they didn't want, the majority of our participants didn't want any cooperation, because they thought that this organization didn't help the country when the country needed any kind of help from CSTO or Russia. So they recall, the participants in Kyrgyzstan recalled 2010 events when CSTO formally refused to intervene, and then more recently the border clashes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in 2021, 2022 were interpreted by the population, the participants in Kyrgyzstan, that Russia mostly sided with Tajikistan during those border clashes. So in that sense, this perception, negative perception of Russia was quite visible in our data. And in this kind of context, Turkey was quite visible. So in both, mostly in Kazakhstan, but to less degree in Kyrgyzstan, people wanted more cooperation in the military sector with Turkey. I think it's because of this drones and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the fact that you're like complementing each other's answers and sort of taking this debate further. There's a general question that I've actually want to put on the table right now, and it's about this link between public policy, public opinion and government policy. So what I wanted to actually hear from you, whether you think there are instances of Central Asian governments trying to shape public policy to basically fit their public opinion based on their policy. It doesn't help that I keep mixing up the words, but you know what I mean. So government sort of trying to change public opinion or shape public opinion, or whether there are instances of actually public opinion shaping government stance on things. And two sort of practical examples that come to my mind is first what Johnny Beck, you were talking about, the skepticism of CSTO. CSTO in, let's say, Kazakhstan, whether then the government response has been to try and promote CSTO and sort of demonstrating how CSTO is great for Kazakhstan, or has it been rather to tone down Kazakhstan's involvement in the CSTO as a response to the negative public perception of the organization? And if we look at this from the China angle, I mean, something that we saw very clearly in the research that Kassiet just presented was this resistance to Chinese land purchases. So, you know, in terms of that, have you seen more of Central Asian governments trying to, shape public opinion and convince citizens that there is no threat in this issue and that selling land is fine? Or has it been rather the opposite of, reacting to this negative mood by blocking Chinese attempts to purchase land in Central Asia? So what would you say to this sort of public opinion government policy nexus?
Maybe I can jump in and then Jennifer can provide a full answer. It's just is there a Central Asia barometer has been working for a long time, and it's was always a question whether there is even a need for public opinion research in this region, because it seems like it doesn't matter. But in the survey literature, there is a special section which is concerned about the surveys in authoritarian countries. And I think the fact, but it depends on the country in Central Asia. For example, in Tajikistan, in Kyrgyzstan, the government doesn't really use the surveys. But in Kazakhstan, for example, the government uses the surveys to show that there is a public consensus over some issue. For example, so there are in Kazakhstan, I think maybe Janibek will comment further, but there are different polling institutions which are quasi governmental, and these polls, they use the government uses these polls to shape the public opinion, showing that there is a public consensus over on very important issues to the government, elections or the recent referendum that was conducted in Kazakhstan. So there is the government actually monitors and it gives attention to the public opinion in Kazakhstan. In Uzbekistan, I also see that there is like a lot of economy related surveys, economy related public opinion polls, but not much about the politics. And in Kyrgyzstan, for example, there is a need, the government tries to show that the public, the country, the people, they support the president and the course of the policy. So it's very important for them, but it's different per country, and there is still a need to continue monitoring public opinion, I believe. But yeah, maybe Janibek can comment further.
Yeah. Maybe just kind of a few words. It's a 1 million question for me, because when we submitted this CSUO paper to a journal, and then we received the comments from the reviewer, one of the reviewers asking to elaborate on public policy implications of the finding that was. We don't know. The short answer would be that we don't know. Definitely, the governments, to a lesser degree in Central Asia, they don't care much about the public opinion. It's not a kind of big secret. And when it comes to foreign policy related issues, it's even more centralized. Decision making is even more centralized. So when we talk about foreign policy decision making in Central Asian countries, we are probably talking about the very few people involved in actually making these decisions, right? So in that sense, again, we can always dispute whether we need the public opinion. But if you ask me personally, of course we need. We don't have to go to that extreme. So at the same time, there have been few cases, at least in Kazakhstan, when we saw the reaction, the government reaction to the public discontent, let's say, right? In 2016, in Kazakhstan, there were back then the biggest protests against leasing land to China. I mean, there was the land reform in Kazakhstan, the planned land reform in Kazakhstan, and people went to the streets against this land reform, arguing that the Chinese companies would come to the country and buy all the land. And then first, then later, government freeze that reform, and later they just, I think, canceled altogether. So that was a reaction to the public discontent in the case of Kazakhstan. Second, I think in the early reactions to the war in Ukraine by the government, especially the president and other political figures in Kazakhstan, were partly designed to address this domestic discontent again. Again, CSTO intervention in January increased threat perceptions in Kazakhstan. And now in June, July, August, September of 2022, we see different government officials saying that different kind of things towards Russia. I think that was probably partly to calm down the domestic audience. Now it's not that urgent. Maybe the government is back to the normal, right? So there might be some cases, but again, generally, public opinion doesn't play a crucial role in shaping foreign policy.
Thank you so much for these answers. We've got 2 minutes left, so I propose that we raise the issue of the private security companies in Central Asia. There's actually been 2 questions about the public opinion on both Russian and Chinese military forces in Central Asia. What can, both of you say about that issue?
I think I can add here that in our surveys, we haven't asked about these companies because our surveys, as I mentioned, is a national-wide surveys covering all population 18 plus. So different groups of population are present, and we try not to ask like this expert, very specific knowledge questions. So we didn't ask about it, but I'm sure it would be interesting to conduct qualitative research on a local level, as said in the question, like around the facilities, Chinese infrastructure projects, like around the roads, or something where there is this things are going on very actively, and they might have a different opinion. But the CUP surveys are national-wide surveys.
I have nothing to add. I'm not a China expert, but I remember a few years ago some publications about private security companies, Chinese private security companies in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, in Kyrgyzstan, I think. So we don't know. But generally, if we talk about anti-Chinese sentiments in Kazakhstan, at least, the security is one of the most sensitive spheres, right? Some people may say yes to Chinese investments, the Chinese factories, but when it comes to security, I think it's oversensitive. So probably taking that a bit kind of further, we could very carefully guess that majority would be negative about it. But again, I have no hard evidence to say anything meaningful about this.
Thank you so much. So obviously, we don't know answers to many questions that there are. There's still more questions coming in the chat, but unfortunately, my role as the moderator is to thank you for this discussion and perhaps say that these questions should be discussed in some future event. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you want to watch this webinar later on, return to the presentations. This webinar will be uploaded to YouTube in a couple days' time, so you're free to share that in your networks. So please join me thanking Janibek and Kasiet for your fantastic insights, and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for hosting us. Bye.
Bye-bye.